The determining factor in the extinction of the tigers of the Caspian, Bali, and Java was the disappearance of their prey. Fortunately, here in Kanha, the striped felines still enjoy the natural balance of the India of the past. For most of the tiger populations of the world, however, prey are increasingly scarce. Barely 15 weeks after mating, the tigress that met the male in the far east of Russia has given birth to 2 cubs. After mating, the female and the male went their separate ways, and she has not seen him since. She will raise the cubs alone and will take care of them for the next 3 or 4 years until they decide that it is time to become independent. A female with cubs needs an average of between 8 and 10 kilos of meat a day, which means over 3,000 kilos a year. For the new mother, the challenge will be to feed her children. And that challenge will be even greater at this time of year. The air carries the unmistakable smell of the highlands, smells that anticipate the harsh Siberian winter. In the winter months, hunting becomes increasingly scarce and more difficult. The world is paralyzed, and prey and hunters alike must survive a period of scarcity, an annual test that many will prove unable to pass. In lower regions, the end of the autumn announces difficult times. Our tigress knows that her cubs face the hardest test of their short lives. Hunger is a threat, and in this region where government is virtually non-existent, the tigers' prey, like the habitat in which they live, is progressively disappearing year after year. Knowing that the life of her children is at stake, the tigress goes out hunting. Fire is the greatest enemy of the Siberian tigers. Intentional fires are destroying the territory of the tigers. Some years, up to 2.5 million hectares are burnt down. And with the loss of their habitat, the tiger's prey disappears. With increasingly small and increasingly fragmented territories, the tigers are concentrated in their last refuges. And paradoxically, though there are very few left, in these small remaining areas their numbers can be so high that they rapidly wipe out their natural prey. Then, inevitably, the tigers seek alternatives. Hunger makes them overcome their instinctive fear of man, and old problems reappear. Domesticated cattle is easy, tasty prey for a tiger. Once they have seen how easy it is to get, the tigers return time and time again for more. The owners of the cattle are in turn poor people whose subsistence depends to a great extent on their animals, so they come out to defend them, causing clashes between tigers and humans. And it is then that the tigers may discover that there is another prey, even more numerous and vulnerable than the cattle, and so they end up becoming man-eaters. For the tigers of India, the loss of their habitat and consequently of their prey is also the most serious problem. Inside the national parks, the tigers are safe, but the edges of the parks are often areas greatly coveted by the local people. The jungle conserves the humidity in the soil. Two increasingly scarce factors, but two vital factors for subsistence agriculture. The majority of the 1 billion inhabitants of India live in the most absolute poverty. Cultivating a little land, obtaining a miserable harvest represent a short-term future, but the bare minimum for survival. The edges of the parks are burnt and cut down in search of the humidity of the soil. Day by day, the desert encroaches, isolating the last oasis of jungle and life. In a country whose land has lost almost 3/4 of the humidity of its soil, the wood of the forest and the animals of the jungle are the only possibility of life for millions of Indians. And the problem also has other aspects. The same farmers that burn and cut allow their cattle to graze in the fertile interior of the parks. The cattle decimate the vegetation and introduce diseases that devastate the populations of wild herbivores. It is a disastrous combination. The felled trees no longer retain the humidity, and the cattle inexorably destroy the plant coverage on which the wild herbivores depend. The rains disappear, the soil is lost, and a powerful enemy takes over: the desert. It was precisely in a national park surrounded by deserts that the Asian lion was saved from extinction, which was achieved thanks to the fact that the lion was the national animal of India. And this provided the inspiration for Karan Singh to undertake the even more ambitious project for the conservation of the tiger.
I discovered that the national animal of India was the lion at that time. Now, as you know, our national symbol has the 4 lions. There's a marvelous column from Ashoka's time showing the lions, which is why the lion was probably adopted as a national animal. However, it struck me that lions in India are found only in one state, in Gujarat, and there are only about a couple of hundred lions, whereas the tiger was at that time and still is widely dispersed throughout India, from the north to the south and from the east to the west. So I suggested, at my initiative, that we should change the national animal of India from the lion to the tiger. And that really set in motion this whole process of the tiger project. Because once we adopted the tiger as our national animal, then of course the question arose with regard to tiger conservation. And I discussed the matter with Madam Gandhi, and she was very supportive. She said, "What would you like to do?" I said, "I think we should have a special project to save the tigers from extinction."
The success of the Tiger Project is based on the understanding that, in order to save the species, we have to protect its habitat. It was no longer a question of watching over and caring for a given animal, but rather of saving the jungles in which the tigers lived, along with the prey they need to feed themselves. A pioneering vision which today guides all conservation projects.
It isn't only the tiger you safeguard, because once you safeguard the tiger, it means you have to safeguard the ecosystem which supports the tiger. So that's what we did, and we started off with 9 projects, and it has now grown, I believe, to about 18 or 20 tiger reserves. And at one stage it was the most successful conservation project in the world, because the tigers had been hunted to the verge of extinction. Our estimate was that in the year 1900 there must have been about 50,000 tigers in India. When we started Project Tiger in the early 70s, there were hardly 2,500 or 3,000 tigers left.
In the interior of the last refuges of the Siberian tiger or the Amur tiger, teams of scientists take samples and carry out censuses of the tigers. This is part of an ambitious project financed by conservationist organizations from all over the world, especially the World Wildlife Foundation, aimed at saving the Siberian tiger. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, there has been an alarming decrease in the numbers of Siberian tigers. Across the Chinese border, which lies close to the last refuges of the Siberian tiger, the poachers have opened up a very lucrative trade route, taking advantage of the lack of means of the Russian Wildlife Department. With international funds, the Siberian Tiger Project is fighting against this illegal traffic. While the scientists investigate in order to create an appropriate conservation plan, new patrols and new teams are joining the fight to save the tiger. In Russia, India, Indochina, or any of the other countries that still have tigers, the situation of the tigers of the world is so alarming that constant monitoring by the guards is necessary. The territorial nature of the tigers makes it easy to monitor them and to carry out censuses. But the jungles in which they live are not easy places to move around in. In many parks, the elephant is the best, safest vehicle. But when the trail of a poacher is detected, great care is needed, and the men must enter the territory of the tigers on foot. A wounded tiger and an armed poacher are equally dangerous, and that means that the park wardens require exhaustive training, something which costs a lot of money. The conservationist organizations provide part of the budgets, but the parks are now becoming increasingly self-financing. In the early hours of the morning, a group of tourists has climbed up onto the back of an elephant and is about to enter the interior of the jungle. These tourists have come from all parts of the world and have paid considerable sums of money to be able to see a tiger in its natural environment. And by doing so, they are not only financing the protection of the tiger, but are also helping to increase worldwide awareness of the need to conserve the species. When these travelers return to their countries of origin, they will attract new visitors and will create a sense of affinity with the cause of the tiger. And because they bring foreign currency into the region, the locals will also begin to value the tiger and the environment in which it lives.